Well, hey everybody, thank you for checking in once again and welcome to another one. Over the past few years, I seem to have collected rather a lot of these vintage cameras and these vintage lenses. So that's what we're going to be talking about today, collecting this old gear, why we do it, what we get out of it, how we do it, and can we make any money out of it. That's what's coming up, so stay tuned. So I have collected quite a lot of this old kit, and it's a collection I've built kind of by mistake really. I wasn't really intending to actually build a collection. It's just something that's happened as I've bought more cameras and lenses for the channel than I've actually sold. Not many more, but I have bought a few more, so over the years they've kind of built up. So why do I keep hold of them? Why don't I just sell them all on and be done with it? Well, one reason that I do it is that I just like the objects themselves. I find them very beautiful, very useful, very extraordinary things. And if you think about it, how long has it taken for humanity to produce something like this? Well, I would say it's probably taken around 6,000 years of developing technology, from Sumeria, living in big cities, and developments on from that time, developments in thinking, developments in economies, all have led us to this point where we are now, where we can make something like this. And these are beautiful objects, these are extraordinary objects, and I think that's a lot of the reason I keep hold of the ones that I do keep hold of. I think another reason, if I'm honest, is that when I was a lot younger than I am now, in the late 70s, I remember walking around camera shops with my dad, trying to find a camera for Christmas for me that A, Dad could afford, and B, I actually liked and would, serve me well for a few years. So I've got lots of memories of, Nikons like these, looking at these through the windows of Dixon's and other similar stores, looking at the old Olympuses and the Canons that were all sitting there shiny and new at the time, but were a little bit out of reach because they were quite expensive. I think an SLR like this with a 1.8 lens probably would have cost, from memory, around about £400 in the late 70s, £400, and that was quite expensive at the time. In fact, it was very expensive at the time. So I think that's perhaps why I've held on to some of these cameras and lenses rather longer than I should have done, is just that I couldn't really afford them at the time that they were current. Now, I guess another reason people collect and keep this old gear is conservation. Collection as conservation, a sort of a museum type approach. It's a little bit like the way some people keep old cars as something to be conserved. Now, it's actually quite a lot easier to conserve cameras than it is cars. Cars don't last all that long if you don't use them. You have to keep using them. Cameras, yeah, you do have to keep using them. Just like any mechanism, it will go out of adjustment and seize up if you don't use it. Over time, things just go wrong. But as long as you store them in a good environment that doesn't have too much humidity in it, doesn't have too much heat in it, isn't too cold, doesn't have really any extremes of conditions, then you should be pretty much okay. They were well made for the most part. The materials were top-notch, first-class materials for the most part, even in the cheaper cameras. So as long as you keep them in good conditions, then they will last. And indeed, I think that's partially why, at least partially why, I keep a lot of this old gear that I've kept just to conserve it, because this stuff isn't being made anymore. There is a finite supply of it. They are remarkable old machines, even though they are old machines now, and they do need to be conserved. They do need to be kept, cared for, stored, so that the history can be preserved, so that future generations can at least look at these things, maybe even use them if film is still available and being made. So I do think that conservation is quite an important reason for collecting things. It may or may not be part of your reason for collecting this old gear, but I think it probably is part of mine. I think it really is important to preserve old manufactured machines. The technology required, the effort, the money, the coordination required to set up a production line to produce an object like this is immense, and it won't happen again. These will never be made again. So it really is important, I think, to preserve what we've got, to conserve what we've got, and to keep at least some of these old machines alive for the future. Why is that important? Honestly, I can't really say too easily, except that intuitively I feel it's important, and that is certainly part of why I do it. All right, let's talk about collecting as investment. Can you make money off these things? We've used a lot of vintage lenses on this channel over the past 10 years. I've never counted them, but there really have been quite a lot. All of the old camera gear has risen in value. Some of it has risen a lot in value. Most of it has risen also quite a lot in value, probably around about 40–50%. This Fed 4 is a good example. This is a Ukrainian-made rangefinder. It's a very, very simple camera. It's all manual. It's essentially 1930s technology. Now, I bought this about 10 years ago, and I paid £9 for this Fed 4, which struck me as a pretty good price at the time. I didn't need another rangefinder camera. I did have one or two at the time. I didn't need another rangefinder, even at the bargain price of £9, but I thought, well, when am I going to see a Fed 4 for £9 again? That seemed very, very cheap to me. These cameras were deeply unfashionable at the time. I mean, they're still quite unfashionable now. And they really weren't worth anything. Nobody wanted them at all. And, you could just about sell them. It was almost on the point where you couldn't sell them. That is how low the demand was. And the demand's really increased since then, such that one of these will now cost around £40 or thereabouts. You might see them go for 60. You might even see them go for more than that, but I'd say generally a good average guesstimate estimate is sort of £40–50 area. So that's risen in price by some number of percentages, about 4 times, isn't it? 3 or 4 times, 300 or 400% increase in price and value. So that's pretty good. And all of this old kit has risen in price, no doubt about it. So are these things viable as an investment? Is this old gear the kind of thing that you could conceivably invest in and make it actually work? Well, now, things become valuable for 2 reasons, I guess, and these 2 reasons have to be in place at the same time. They become valuable when A, they become rare or perhaps not manufactured anymore, and B, they become valuable when people actually want them. So if something's rare, there's not a lot of them around, and people want them, that's when values are going to go up. And that's what's happened really to all the film gear, thanks only really to mirrorless cameras, because we now use these old lenses on mirrorless cameras, and that's what this channel's all about, of course. And that's why this old gear has risen in price, because people want it again. Much of it isn't rare, but there is a finite and dwindling supply. Like this Fed 4, this is a good example. It's not a rare camera. There were millions and millions and millions made, but there is a dwindling supply of these cameras, and there's certainly a dwindling supply of good ones in working order that you can go out and shoot. So these are all factors that have combined to bring those prices up. Right now, this old gear is in demand. There is a demand for it. There's a commercial pressure upon it. And if you bought lots of this old gear 10 years ago, if you bought, I don't know, 1,000 choice lenses that you thought would increase in value, yeah, you would have made a packet. You could sell those lenses on for quite a big increase, depending on whether or not you'd chosen the right lenses and whether or not you'd chosen wisely. So there's been a big increase in demand. Prices are currently quite high. Is that demand going to increase? If you bought a bunch of these lenses now, could you be sure that the demand would be continuing, so that in 5 or 10 years time you would be able to clean up? Well, that's a difficult thing to know. Certainly if you'd done it 10 years ago, it would have paid off. But these things were deeply unfashionable at the time. All of the old film gear, not just Fed 4s and that kind of camera, but all of it, even the very fancy gear, just wasn't wanted. It was almost completely disregarded. People didn't want it. It was yesterday's tech. It looked like nothing. It looked old in comparison to the shiny new DSLRs that were coming out, shiny new mirrorless cameras and such like. And those old cameras looked very, very old, and they just didn't wear the same sheen that they wore today. So if you had made an investment at that time, you would have been A, very smart, and B, somebody who can see through the spirit of the time, who can see through what winds are blowing at the current time, and see how it's going to develop. Now, whether that demand is going to continue to increase so that in 10 years you can make money, in 5 years you can make money, who knows? I just don't know. I don't have a crystal ball. Well, actually, I do have a crystal ball, one that somebody bought me as a gift a little while ago, but I can't tell the future with it, so I really don't know. So will this demand continue into the future? Well, with an inoperative crystal ball, I can't really tell you, but I can tell you that there is, just as there was 10 years ago, and throughout that intervening time, there is and will be a diminishing supply of this equipment. Some of it will wear out, some of it will be damaged beyond repair, some of it will be left in poor conditions, stored in poor conditions and get in very bad condition. Some of it might just be chucked out by people who don't really know what they've got hold of. So there is a diminishing supply of these lenses, of this equipment, and that is a pressure that will encourage prices to continue to rise. Whether or not demand will continue, well, now there's an interesting question. Are people going to be wanting to shoot these lenses in 10 years' time, in 20 years' time, in the same way that they do now? That is, mostly on digital mirrorless, I would imagine, but also on some film cameras. Well, I think that they will. I think that demand will continue. I don't think this is a passing fad. I think these are worthy optics. I think they do have something to offer over and above automatic focus modern lenses. They do give us a look that we can't get with modern lenses, and they can be very useful. Autofocus is not always the most useful thing to use. If you're making a movie, you need manual focus. If you're in the middle of a crowd and you're trying to shoot somebody through that crowd, you don't know really where the autofocus is going to land, and so that's a time when you need a manual focus lens They're also nice, simple tech, and they won't break down. If you service them and look after them, they will go on, as I've said before. So they're nice, simple tech. They're not difficult to fix, and that also is another factor that will probably aid their survival over and above modern lenses. But whether the same demand is going to be there in 10 years' time that is there now, I just don't know. I suppose that's where luck comes in. If you're going to invest in something, you do need a certain amount of luck if that investment is going to pay off. You need to know that it most likely will pay off, for sure. You need to do your thinking properly, and you need to think commercially, but you also need a little bit of luck. So it is perfectly possible, in my view, to make money from old camera gear. If you know what you're doing, if you know the market, and if you know the equipment, that's pretty vital. If you bought, for example, 5 years ago, if you bought a Pancolar, I can't remember if it's 80 or 85 mil, but the Carl's Sienna Pancolar, I'll call it 80 mil f1.8. That lens was worth around about £500-600 at that time, 5 years ago. It's now worth over £1,000. So if you bought one or two of those, or even more, you would have done very, very well out of it. But you've got to know the nature of the kit, you've got to know the market, and you do need a certain amount of luck. Who would know that the Pancolar 80mm would increase in value to that extent? It was already a very expensive vintage lens. It's now an extremely expensive vintage lens, but nobody knew that was going to happen. So, you know, I hope your crystal ball works better than mine. And there are other examples of that as well. The Zuiko, Olympus Zuiko 50mm f1.2 has, gosh, added at least a half to its value since 5 years ago. That lens really has gone up in price. So there probably are certain lenses, in fact there certainly are, I've just told you about two, that there are certain lenses that will increase in price, and if you're a smart camera investor and you know your business, you know what you're doing, you can make money off those kinds of things. What I can guarantee you, and I can pretty much guarantee you this, is that everything that somebody once liked, like a camera like this, like a lens like this, everything that once attracted someone will continue to do so, will attract people in future. And you know, I'm pretty sure that will happen, but it's important that we will be able to use these pieces of kit. I think we'll always be able to use the lenses. I think we'll always be able to adapt the lenses to digital mirrorless cameras or digital cameras of some sort, whatever might come along in the future. So I think that's always going to be a thing we can do. We may not always be able to use film bodies. Film is fairly easy to make, or at least relatively easy to make, certainly when you compare it to a digital sensor. So it might be that there will always be a sort of a backyard industry in film. I don't know, but it won't be common. It's already begun to be extremely expensive, and that price isn't going to go down. So whether the bodies, using the bodies will be viable in 10 years time, I don't know. Certainly using the lenses will for many, many years to come, you know, long beyond 10 years, I would imagine. These are extraordinary objects, there's no doubt about that. And anybody looking at these, you know, at any time in the future, will see an extraordinary object. They'll see something with, you know, layers and layers of glass elements within that lens. They'll see something with chrome plating, polished aluminium, machined surfaces, smart, snickety mechanical controls. So these will always catch people's interest, and they will always have some sort of value because they're extraordinary objects. But I think you'll have to wait a long time to make anything even approaching big bucks with most of this kit. I think the only exceptions might be, you know, very, very rare Leicas, sort of the rarest Leica that there is, or Joseph Niepce's Kodak Instamatic or whatever it was he used. If you're talking about very, very rare cameras, those do seem to make quite a bit of money. But of course, you need quite a bit of money to buy them in the first place. And if you're laying out that kind of money, several hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands of pounds for, a very rare Leica or a very rare Nikon, then you need to be really sure you're going to get that back. So you probably need to be quite wealthy to engage in that game, I would have thought. Although, as I say, there are certain cameras, the very, very rarest cameras, that will always increase in value over time. They might go down a bit here, up a bit there, down a bit again, but generally the line is going to be on an upwards trajectory, I would imagine. And I certainly don't think there are any big bucks to be made on cameras that were made by the million, including this little Fed here and all its little Zorcular relations, including this beautiful Nikon that was again made in the millions or the hundreds of thousands. I don't know exactly how many, but all of the popular cameras, SLRs from the 70s, rangefinders from the 60s and 50s, all of those cameras, of which many, many, many were made, yeah, they'll go up in price over time, but I don't think anyone's ever going to make really big bucks on those. Or, well, I don't know, probably somebody will sometime, but it will be far in the future, I think, before anybody makes big bucks on the ordinary cameras, because there's just too many of them around. They were made in the millions and millions and millions, and I really don't think anyone's going to get rich off them. Although, as we've said, prices do seem to be going upwards at the moment. Nice examples of any camera or lens will always have a value, of course, and the better the condition, the higher the value, obviously, like anything. So if you've got a lens that's in really minty, really nice condition, that's going to have a good value. If that lens has a box and its original packaging and its little instruction manuals and so on, so much the better. Yeah, those will have some value. And even the ordinary cameras, even the ordinary kit in good condition, if it has a box, so much the better, but they will always make some money, although not a huge amount. So if you are thinking of photographic kit that might make you a profit in the future while you use it, maybe don't overpay, don't be too eager, don't rush out and pay lots and lots of money for a lens that you hope will make you money. This is not about hope. Investment is not about hope. Investment is about canny thinking. So it needs to be a wise investment, not desperation. So don't rush headlong into buying something that you hope is going to make you money. Buy the right thing. Do your research. Is it right to buy lenses for investment? Is it better just to use them, just to shoot them, just to do with them what they were designed to do? Well, maybe some would say that. Maybe some would say, no, these shouldn't be kept in, clinical conditions. They were made to be used. Get out and use them. Whereas others would say, no, I think some of these should be preserved. We shouldn't use all of them. We shouldn't use our dwindling finite supply of these beautifully created objects as though they were still current. So we're going to use them and curate them. We're going to keep them and curate them and keep them very safe for future generations to look at. I don't know, my opinion. Look, these are created finite objects and they will eventually, just fall apart, whatever you do with them, just through the ravages of time. I don't know. In 1,000 years, what condition is any of these going to be in? I really don't know. They will have really had to be kept safe to endure for that long. Personally, my take on it is forget about investment, forget about value, forget about worth. Don't try and, use these things to make money off. Just go and use them. Just go and enjoy them. If you've got a nice lens that you like, that you paid a reasonable price for, that goes up in price, okay, that's nice. If you ever want to sell it on, you'll make a few bob. But I would suggest these things are far better considered beautiful objects to be used. These are miraculous objects. They really are. They've existed for hardly any of human history. This technology has existed for hardly any of human history. And we're the first to see it. I'm getting a bit excited now because I really feel this. We are the first to see this miraculous technology. Us and our parents and our grandparents, we were the first ones to see it. And that feels like a privilege. It actually does. And that feels like I owe history something. So while I'm using this stuff, and I do think it's made to be used and not collected or curated or kept, I do think it's meant to be used carefully and cautiously, not unwisely, not in a way that would damage the gear, but I do think it's meant to be used. Like old cars, they'll do no good sitting in the garage. Stick some juice in them, fire them up and go and use them. Same with this one. Same with these things, whack some film in them, go and use them. Put them on your mirrorless camera, go and use them, because that's what they were designed for. And that is where they reach their peak. That is where they are happiest. These things, if they could talk, would say, yeah, we're happiest doing the job we were designed to do. We're happiest going out, working, shooting, being used and experiencing and capturing the light, not sitting around in a cupboard, as a bunch of relics from history. So that's my take on it. Just use them and don't worry about the value. And so, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, we approach the point where we must draw to a close and the metaphorical curtain must come down. But before we do that, I would very much like to thank everybody who has watched this little production today. It really means a lot to me when people tune in and watch this stuff, and I'm really pleased that we've been able to build up some kind of community on this channel. So thank you so much for watching. If you've watched to this point, well, that's fantastic. Well done. Thank you so much, and I really appreciate that, and a special thanks goes to you. Many thanks go to subscribers for your support. If you like this channel and you like what we're doing on the channel, you might want to give us your support in the form of a subscription. Also, chuck us a sub. It doesn't take a second. It would be appreciated, and every extra sub allows me and helps me to make and bring you more content. Similarly, I would like to thank from the bottom of my heart patrons for your support. Many thanks for that support. It is genuinely appreciated, and I couldn't make the show in the way that I do without that support. So many thanks for that. If you like this show and you like the content and you think we're doing a reasonable job of both keeping this old gear alive and using it and helping others to use it, you might want to become a patron too. I would really appreciate that, and you can do it for as little as $1 per month. That would be fantastic. If you can click that button and do that, that would be appreciated. Many thanks to everybody who's watched, tuned in, watched the show, given thanks, given super thanks, made a comment or engaged with the channel in any way. My thanks go out to you. Thank you. As for me, that is it for now. If you're not doing anything that's taking up too much of your time this time next week, and if you're not doing anything too irksome, irritating or annoying, please do tune in for a spot more Zenography. I will be here. I hope to see you there. Cheerio all.